This is the story of one place through the whole of English history.
Even little Kibworth had its Norman castle. It's a statement of intent, isn't it?
This is what you've really come to see.
To tell the tale, we'll be using medieval manuscripts, letters, diaries, photos, and the latest science.
That timber and all the other timbers in that range are probably felled in 1385.
But our biggest help will come from the villagers themselves,
This is Peter.
reading the texts of their ancestors, digging pits, and doing surveys of their medieval fields.
On the other side of the hedge. Of the hedge.
That's cheating.
No, it wasn't.
Done that earlier.
And for once, this is not the tale of the rulers.
Of course, you can always tell history through the stories of kings and queens, but it's only when you look at it through the lives of the ordinary people and see how our society's developed over time, how our rights and duties have evolved, and how waves of newcomers have shaped and changed us, that you begin to understand who we really are.
Vader ure su sa erton helvenum. Siasi nama yahalgod.
I go out at daybreak and drive the oxen. It's hard work because I'm not free.
1349. John Church, Reeve. The following tenants died of the pestilence: Emma Cook, Alice Aaron, John Church Sr., Agnes Poley, Robert Poley.
I was born on March the 12th, 1783. I had no education, for instead of school, I was set to lace making.
I expect that you have heard that our regiment has been in a big fight. The enemy's trench taken at bayonet point, but Lance Corporal Fisher was killed.
Did you know you got a family member here?
Yeah.
So that's him.
Yeah, must be.
The History and Antiquities of the County of Leicestershire. It's written in the 1780s and 90s. And here, the first detailed account of Kibworth. In ancient writings called Kibworth, is situated on the Great Turnpike Road from London, 9 miles distant from Leicester and 5 from Harborough, the nearest market town. It consists of 3 hamlets: Kibworth Beecham, or Lower Kibworth, Kibworth Harcourt, Upper Kibworth, and Smeaton Westerby, now considered as one hamlet, although actually 2 distinct villages. And the church, dedicated to St. Wilfrid, pleasantly situated on a considerable eminence amid a group of trees.
Now, if that makes Kibworth sound like a bit of an idyll, of course it's not. It's a real place in today's Britain, the kind of place most of us live in now. It's got housing estates, Chinese and Indian takeaways, and traffic. But like every place, it carries the marks of history.
This was the main London road in the 18th century, and the fancy pizzeria, the Borboli, was one of the coaching inns. There were 7 or 8 of them just along this street here. Bricked up coaching entrance there. They sold more than food and drink too, some of them.
It's the same anywhere in England. You only have to look and the stories leap out.
That's my Aunt Annie.
And with a little help, you can begin to piece together the picture.
There'd been a telephone exchange here at some time.
You can watch the great events of the nation through local eyes and see how our ancestors really lived.
There's no way that William Herrick is going to be looking after his house. That's what you people are for.
And whether you're reading the village newspaper from the Second World War, Christmas greetings, happy family reunions, good luck and success in Civvy Street, or the treasure trove of medieval manuscripts in the school box.
First two boxes, the early stuff, is here. And the really oldest material, going back to the 1350s.
Our ancestors will always surprise us.
We're not just talking about one literate man every 20 miles. They're all over the place. Yeah, yeah. And they're writing, and they're writing, and they're writing.
But why choose Kibworth?
Kibworth is right in the centre of the country. And from the 1200s, it's got the most wonderful set of documents that enable you to tell the story of ordinary people's lives. But it doesn't stop then. In the Industrial Revolution, it's got canals and railways and framework knitting and factories. In other words, in this one place, you can tell the whole story of the nation.
The search began one summer Saturday morning. In answer to our advert on local radio, 250 villagers gathered at the village hall to help us search for their past. First, they were going to dig more than 50 archaeological test pits across the village. And they had to do it professionally, supervised by the experts.
This is going to be a brilliant weekend. It's fantastic to see so many people here. The record booklet is effectively it's this thing here. It's a pro forma recording system. You'll be digging your test pit, which is 1 metre square, in a series of 10 centimetre slices. Each of those 10 centimetre slices we call the context. Good luck. Have fun.
Now, like most places in England, Kibworth is only recorded for the first time in 1086 in Domesday Book. Before then, its history is a blank. So what could archaeology tell us about its beginnings? That was our first task.
This is part of the old medieval village of Harcourt here.
This whole 3 villages at the moment is complete darkness, really, in terms of what we know about physically what's there, archaeologically what's there, what really was going on. If we can do 50 test bits, that just throws the lights on.
It's knockout, isn't it? And we've got the phenomenal documents for this bit. Not bad for that.
The Home Guard used to practice here, and there were some unspent bullets just around this area. So.
You know, I'm hoping to find something good.
Tape measure, just there, darling.
Yes, I suspect it might have been bigger originally.
Oh, you're doing a great job. Hi, everybody.
That's for the clay pipe, for example. So that again, this is sort of ordinary Victorian, early 20th century household. They're the sort of precursors to cigarette.
You found like shoe heels and belt buckles and stuff.
Keep on finding rock. We found some pieces of a pot.
Apparently that's the tibia from a sheep.
At the start, our clues were just broken bits of pottery, but it's amazing what an expert can get out of them.
What we've actually got is pretty much every major pottery type going back to about 1450.
Fantastic.
Earliest bit we've got is that, which is Midland purple, so that's about 400, 1450. It could be as early as 1350. It's one of those pottery types we haven't quite got nailed down, but it's certainly post-Black Death, yeah. This place has been occupied since certainly 1400, I'd say, and maybe even 1350, because you've got this, which dates to about 1470, 1500. That, which is about 1550. 1580, 1600. That's about 1680 to 1700. That's 1720 to 1750. And then you've got the 19th century stuff as well. So, bang, full
We've
run
got the house.
straight through. And you've got the house. Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
So you've got to sit 650 a run of pottery in these trays.
And then one piece got us all excited.
That is looking good. That looked very nice. Let me just dry it off.
Which is a nice bit where we've just been. You should have a look.
I think that is. It's a piece of really, really beaten up Samian ware, 1st, 2nd century. But that's Roman. I'm pretty certain that's Roman.
By the afternoon, we'd got more Roman.
Fantastic.
Yes, okay.
We've lots of cobbles and
Ooh, let me come round.
found some teeth, 3 teeth in the other layers.
Yeah?
And
some Roman pottery.
yeah, Roman pottery, 2 pieces.
Roman?
Yeah.
Wow. So did you dig those up yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did, didn't we?
So has it been fun?
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been really fab. I've never seen these two concentrate so much in our lives.
Roman pottery.
Wow. Cool. Gosh, it's all beautifully bagged and... Yeah, that is great, isn't it? 4th century, maybe.
So it was only the first day, and we already had Roman, Iron Age, beaker people, and prehistoric flints.
Okay, big bones.
So how's it been, Richard?
I've kind of lost the will to live, to be honest with you. It's been... Yeah, that's natural clay, that, with iron pan in it. You'll be delighted to know you can stop.
But of course, serious archaeologists just put the kettle on. Back in the coach and horses that first day, we already knew that people had lived in the village for thousands of years.
Absolutely fantastic. The more you know the village, the more you find out about the village, the more intriguing it gets.
And you don't realise the heritage that a village like Harcourt or Beecham has.
I had no interest in any of this before you all came, so it's been really a revelation, hasn't it, I think, to all of us.
The bit I liked was the little bit of flint we had, the little chipping. I just imagine the little Stone Age man sitting on top of our hill, just chipping away and looking at the same similar view.
But a village is more than bricks and potsherds. It's a living community. And we know from Domesday Book that Kibworth was already a community in 1086. So how did that happen? How far back does Kibworth really go? Was it a village under the Romans? After all, Leicester nearby was an important Roman city. To try to find out more, I went back to the first archaeologists. Back in the 1700s, there were discoveries made in Kibworth, a hoard of Roman coins, and even a Roman inscription lost long ago.
And just have a look at this. Here's the Ordnance Survey map from the 1880s, which actually marks one of these discoveries. Here's Kibworth Harcourt, and in the 1810s and then in the 1850s, on this mound in the middle of the village behind the allotments, the Munt, fragments of Roman pottery were discovered, and you see they're actually marked by the Ordnance Survey here. And they also, at the same time, dug a derelict medieval windmill mound on the edge of the village, found more Roman pottery. And close by there, in the late 1960s, a coin of the Emperor Constantine was discovered from the 330s, along with fragments of Roman roof tiles. So had there been some large Roman building in that area? If we're going to search for a Roman predecessor to Kibworth, then my guess would be that's where you should look.
And who better to help us than the local experts? A group from the neighbouring village of Hallerton who are specialists in detecting what lies beneath the soil.
This is a magnetometer. What it specialises in doing is detecting
changes in the Earth's magnetism caused by the presence of buried archaeological remains. Where this particular technique is at its best really is in identifying things like the presence of ditches and gullies, pits, wells. But more often than not, it's the individual plots within which buildings may have been found.
I'd brought with me an account from a local journal of finds made here in Victorian times. 1863. Large bell-shaped barrow surrounded by a ditch, northwest of the village, east of the road. Opened early in the last century, which is early 1800s. And again in 1863, fragments of bone, Samian pottery, layer of black soil, ashes, pieces of burnt wood, pieces of Roman pottery, and a pavement. So there is a Roman villa or building site somewhere here, isn't it? All sorts of clues.
Ooh, looks pretty good. Let's process this a little bit more.
Yes, we've got...
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, it looks fabulous. Here's our 60-metre wide, 200-metre long strip. And there in the top left-hand corner is the mill mound. Fantastic. Clear as a whistle. And coming down at the bottom part, whole series of rectangular enclosures, classic ditches that we see on a Roman farm or a Roman villa. Well, this afternoon we clearly need to do another strip 20 metres wide down this end so that we can get the rest of the mill mound and the southwestern corner of our Roman settlement, and then we're going to extend as far across this field to the north to get the rest of the settlement and see what else we can find.
We did this field, picked up about 13, 14 bits of Iron Age pottery, which is quite a lot.
Yeah.
And there were these rib bones which were definitely human at the time.
Wow.
They turned out to be pig bones later on.
But those pig bones led the Hallerton Group to the greatest Iron Age treasure ever found in Britain. In 2000, they unearthed bowls, bracelets, ingots, and thousands of coins. The Hallerton treasure. It was buried near Kibworth at a shrine of the ancient British people who lived in this area, the Corieltavi. The coins even named some of their kings, Vepo and Volisios and Domno Coveros, who ruled here on the eve of the Roman conquest in the 1st century. Over the next few days, fitted in at weekends or after work, the Hallerton Group mapped the whole villa. It turned out to have been laid out over a settlement of circular huts of the ancient Britons, not long after the Roman conquest. You could never have imagined in your wildest dreams that here in this field we'd turn up a huge Roman villa with all its ancillary buildings and courtyards and evidence of life back in the Iron Age and the Bronze Age. It's a whole new beginning to the story of Kibworth. So there had been a community here even before the Romans, which had continued under Roman rule. The finds at the villa now focused our attention on the mysterious mound in the middle of the village, known locally as the Munt. There are old stories that it was a Roman burial mound, and now we know there was a Roman villa nearby. Could that be true? Could it even be the tomb of one of those kings of the Corieltavi, who became a local landowner under the Romans? There's lots of local legends about the Munt. Some people say it was from the time of the ancient Britons or the Vikings, or that it was a Norman castle mound. But in the 1860s, there was an excavation here. They dug a trench into the mound, And 9 feet down found the remains of a burial chamber, stone-lined with bone and ash, and an iron lampstand and fragments of pottery, Roman pottery.
So Kibworth was a Roman settlement. And maybe the Munt was the tomb of a British chief living there under Roman rule. We'd found Roman pottery through Harcourt and Beecham down to Smeaton Westerby. And it's easy to see why the Romans chose to live here.
It's a wonderful little enclave. When you walk along the main street of Kibworth Beecham, you'd never suspect that this lies here.
Because a lot of people don't know it's here.
There was good soil, and above all, good water.
I think there's about 20 wells just in the Harcourt.
Well, there
along
are
this
down
low
here,
ridge.
quite a long one down this road too, where the double gates are. There's a well there. That holds a lot of water, I understand. And the pump used to work. It would work again if I had it primed, but I haven't had it primed for several years now. When I was a little girl, they used to pump up twice a day. The two chaps that work here. Huckleberry and Grewcock were their names.
So that's why the Romans liked it here. How lucky you are, you Britons, wrote one Roman poet. More blessed than any other land, endowed by nature with every benefit of soil and climate. Your winters are not too cold, your summers are not too hot. And to make life even more pleasant, your days
are long, and your nights are short. So, while to us Italian, the sun may appear to go down, in Britain, it just seemed to go past.
Lino opened Kibworth's first Italian restaurant, at least since the 4th century.
We took it on 3 years ago and sort of Italianised it.
Yeah.
The Bobbly Gardens.
The Bobbly Gardens.
Indeed. In Kibworth, not Florence.
It's great with the Munt behind you, the kind of symbol of Kibworth.
But civilizations decline and fall. Around 400 AD, the Roman Empire went into decline. There were many reasons: costly foreign wars, food crises, greedy bankers, climate change. Sounds familiar? In 410, the Romans pulled their garrisons out of Britain. And soon, all the achievements of Roman civilization had gone.
It must have seemed scarcely believable. All these great achievements of Roman civilization, the theatres, the civic buildings, the bathhouse, all of them falling into ruin.
So Britannia went back to basics. In history, it's always surprising how swiftly the veneer of civilization can be lost. How knowledge is forgotten. Maybe this is what will happen when the petrol runs out. The elites go, and with them the know-how. In technology, we won't match the Romans again until the 18th century. So the villas are abandoned, murals crumble, mosaics break up, and with them, a whole view of the world. The original people, of course, remain. They're still the basis of our DNA today. But now we start to hear of newcomers, economic migrants, more and more of them, inviting their countrymen and women from across the North Sea in Germany and Denmark. And they are the Anglo-Saxons.
This is one of the routes those early Anglo-Saxon migrants took into the heart of England. And it's an Anglo-Saxon landscape. There's an Anglo-Saxon cemetery up on that hill above us. It's called Knave's Hill, from the Anglo-Saxon word knatha, meaning young man or a young warrior. And even better is this little stream here, which flows down from the Kibworth area into the River Welland. It's called the Langton Caudle today, the cold well or the cold spring, but it's got an older name. It used to be called the Lipping. And over in Schleswig, on the German-Danish border, there's still a river called the Lipping, in the region called Angeln, the very place where the Angles, the early English, came from. Isn't that wonderful?
What you guys need to be, you just need to get it broken up, sort it through as quickly as possible.
And back in the big dig in Kibworth, amazingly, the regulars at the Coach and Horses found their traces underneath the car park.
Unless I'm very much mistaken. I don't think I am. That's a bit of early Saxon pottery. Now we're talking 5th, 6th century, 7th maybe, something like that. So it's the first bit of pagan period Saxon I've seen from the entire dig, all the test bits. It's a piece of an Anglo-Saxon bone comb.
Around 500 maybe.
Yeah,
That could be that early.
A little bit earlier, a little bit later, but that's certainly pre-700.
From the Coach and Horses car park, who would have believed it? The most incredible thing. It's amazing how such a tiny piece can be so evocative in terms of, well, our imaginings about the early people of Kibworth. An Anglo-Saxon comb from maybe around the year 500.
The newcomers were a minority. Around them, most people still spoke Welsh. In fact, we can only trace the new migrants by their grave goods, their burial urns, their bone combs, like the one we found. But one of them was buried close to Kibworth.
We know that she was in her very early 20s at latest because of the way that the bones are fused. You know, there's one last bone in your big toe that fuses when you're about 21 or 22, and that hadn't happened. Everything else had fused on. So we know pretty precisely how old she was. Wow. Well built, about 5'6" tall.
What part of society do you think she came from?
She came from the top of society. I mean, she was found 1866, but we haven't found a better furnished grave. And not only are they a lot of things with her, but they are exotic things. Got the glass beaker at the top there. That's probably come from the Rhineland. The early Saxons had similar sort of beliefs to the Vikings. They believed in the feasting halls of the gods that you went to after you died. And like all well brought up people, she takes a bottle with her when she's going to a party, particularly one that's going to last for eternity.
And tell us about the jewellery, these very perfectly preserved pieces, aren't they? Here they look as if they were made yesterday.
These are essentially glorified safety pins. They hold her dress together, one of them on each shoulder. She was wearing a tube dress, so just basically a tube of cloth that's held up here on the shoulders with these two big safety pins. And then on the back of one of these brooches, there is a woolen thread tied around the spring, which almost certainly is the cord for this swag of beads that went round here from brooch to brooch. That's the way that Anglo-Saxons wore their beads, not round the neck, but from brooch to brooch. You saw all of them. None of them were hidden round the back. And of course, at the centre of that is a bear claw. These are lucky charms, which ward off the evil eye.
And here, very interesting. These little pieces, lined and notched patterns.
They're stylised keys. Roman women wore actual keys on their belt to show that they were in charge of the household. Anglo-Saxon women, although sometimes you find functional keys, wear these stylised ones, seem to give the same message without actually opening a door. So it suggests that she was, even though she was relatively young, was in charge of a household. She was probably first or second generation Anglo-Saxon settler. Whether she is an Anglo-Saxon ethnically is another story entirely. All of those sites that had Romans on them at the end of the Roman period have Anglo-Saxon pottery on them in 500 or whenever that pottery is coming in. And my guess is that they are the very same people who, in some cases, whose family were there as Iron Age people before the Romans got there, have gone all the way through and then re-emerge as Anglo-Saxons when that is the way that the wind is blowing. One straw in the wind, and it is only a tiny little straw, is this Roman bead. I like to think maybe that was her grandmother's favourite bead that she wears. All these Anglo-Saxon beads, one Roman one, just to maybe think about that side of her family.
These first Anglo-Saxons were pagans, barbarians as the Romans saw them, scratching their runes, weaving their spells. They worshipped the gods of storm and forest, Woden and Thunor at the Holy Oak, near Kibworth. But then towards 600, back in Rome, Pope Gregory sent Christian missionaries to bring the lost province of Britain back into the fold of civilization. Just as the heartland of Christianity was about to fall to Arab armies bearing the new faith of Islam, Roman missionaries went west to seek new converts for Christ among the northern barbarians.
One day the Pope was walking through a slave market in Rome and he saw a group of slaves who were fair-skinned, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and he asked who they were, and the answer was Angli-sunt. They're Angles, English. The Pope, though, was so taken by their appearance that he answered, "No, Angli-sunt," said Angeli, they're not Angles, they're angels. The English loved this story. It almost made them into a kind of chosen people. The gens Anglorum, the race of the Angles, the English people. And ever since, although it was the Saxons who created the Kingdom of England, we weren't Saxonish, we were English.
So, in the 7th and 8th centuries, the people of Kibworth became part of the Christian Kingdom of Mercia. This is a completely unknown period in the village story, but in the Big Dig, we found one tantalizing clue.
Okay, so test pit 41 you've got here.
This is
Smeaton.
Yeah, this is really quite sensational.
You're joking.
I'm afraid
I've had too much of this sensation already today.
It's a nice assortment of sort of, I suppose, late 11th into early 12th century. But we've got one bit of earlier pottery mixed in with it. This rather grotty and quite dull-looking grey sherd is the missing piece of the jigsaw. It's Middle Saxon, Ipswich ware. Dates to between about 720 and 850.
Well, that's very interesting.
Yes.
I don't think we've got any of that so far.
You haven't, and neither's anybody else in Leicestershire. It's the first site anywhere in Leicestershire that's produced this particular type of pottery. If you take Derbyshire, Leicestershire and Nottinghamshire together, there's only 3 sites have ever produced it. It's usually a sign of either high status or 2 major routeways meeting, and this stuff travels a long way, but I've never seen any from Leicestershire before. It wasn't so much the pots themselves that were being traded, it was mainly their contents. Probably salt, it seems to be tied in with the salt trade.
Oh, really?
From what I can make out,
So
yeah.
salt to the king's table in this?
Quite possibly, yeah.
Now, the date you're saying is between the sort of 720s and 850s?
About that, yeah.
So this is right the moment when the famous kings of Mercia, like Offa, who built his dyke, and Ethelbald, they are staying in royal residences all around Kibworth, aren't they? In Gumley and Glen and these places.
Well, that's exactly the sort of thing you'd expect to find at a royal centre in this part of the world.
God, it makes you want to know more about Kibber, whoever he, or was it a she, was, the person who gave their name to this place. Like all English villages, Kibworth carries its history in its name. Harcourt and Beauchamp, for example, come from the Norman lords after 1066. But the name Kibworth itself is much older.
So when did Kibworth become Kibworth? Well, as with most English towns and villages, the clues lie in the place name and in the landscape. In the later Middle Ages, Kibworth was surrounded by a defensive ditch and hedge to keep out outlaws and bandits at night. Now, the name Kibworth means Kibber's Worth, the ditched enclosure of a man called Kibber. And place names like that start in the 730s in English documents, around the time of Paul's pottery. And the name Kibber sounds suspiciously like the names you find in the Mercian royal family: Pibber, Knebber, and Tibber. My guess would be, and it is just a guess, that Kibber was a minor Mercian royal who received this very nice piece of real estate from one of the Mercian kings, Zoffer or Athelbald, surrounded it with a ditch, and it's borne his name ever since.
And what was life like for our 8th century ancestors? Don't imagine a typical English village with a winding lane and thatched cottages. Kibworth was a scatter of peasant houses. An Anglo-Saxon village from this time has been excavated at Stow in East Anglia and rebuilt on its footings. Here you can imagine the lives of our villagers. And it was a subsistence life, of a kind you can still see today in many poor parts of the world.
I've stayed in villages like this in Amazonia and Peru, the Hindu Kush and Africa over the years. This is just the same. This is the way that ordinary people, peasant people, have lived their lives through most of human history. And it's the way our English ancestors lived for much of our history too. Those modern ideas about privacy and possessions, you know, bedrooms, your own room, stuff like that, that didn't even begin to come in until Elizabethan times, and for most of us a lot later than that. Maybe that's why all this gives you that little shiver of recognition.
It's so hard for us to imagine, isn't it? We have so much leisure time today in our multi-channel world with its short attention span.
I must say, it's like watching people do a kind of Zen meditation here. It's really interesting, isn't it?
It's very relaxing.
But for them, every key task took time.
Well, I'm spinning straight from the unwashed fleece, straight from the sheep. I take a piece of fleece, which I tease out. Take it in my left hand, slightly scrunched up. Tease a small bit round. And the very fact it's still got all the oils in helps to make it stick. And as you twist the drop weight, the twist runs up the wool and then joins together like magic.
You thread the wools through the wooden tablets, or they might be horn, put the colour in according to how you want the pattern, stretch it on a frame, and then you turn the whole block of tablets in one direction. And you get quite a nice satisfying thump as it comes round. And it brings up a different set of threads to the top.
Weaving was an English art. The great ruler in Europe, Charlemagne, wrote to Offa, the king of Mercia, asking for fine English cloth made in places like Kibworth.
Bread was the staple, basically, and that was what you filled yourself up on. Yeah. Anything you can catch, birds, fish, that sort of thing, the deer, if you could hunt deer. And then in November, of course, you got the blood month, when you kill all your livestock for the winter, and that you would have eaten a lot of meat.
By the 8th century, Welsh was dying out in Midland England, replaced everywhere by Old English, which we still speak today, give or take a few foreign borrowings. Even now, our key words for relationships and emotions are theirs: father, mother, brother, sister, love, hate, life, death.
I suppose the language is the most important single thing.
Well, it's the single key that unlocks their whole mindset, isn't it? And we carry it with us today, of course. One small step for man, one great leap for mankind. Those are all Anglo-Saxon words. You would think that all this stuff would have been excluded long ago and we would have moved on to far grander terms. But no, the Anglo-Saxon stuff, the English stuff is still here.
It's very, very rare to find the ordinary people speaking,
Very
isn't
much
it?
so.
And but there is this wonderful dialogue from around the year 1000, which is an interview with an Anglo-Saxon ploughman.
Indeed, yes, yes.
And it begins, "What sayest thou, earthling?" Earthling, that's the kind of thing I'd kind of had from Star Trek. Earthling.
Earthling. Earthling is a person who deals with the earth, the earth. Yes, this is
The person who deals with the earth.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Who begest thou work thee?
Thine. Yeah.
How'd you go about your work? Tell us about your work.
Well,
so what does he say?
He says, Ela leo flavord, therle ich derve. Lo, Lord, dear Lord, hard I must work. Ich ga ut on deirad thuwende oxan to felda, and juch je hier to sul. Ak juke den oxen, and je fastnet on schere on kultre, mit sare sul, alce dai it shall erian fulne atcher. Habe sumne knappan, thuwende oxan mit gardisene, ze sultje nu hasis for julde und reme. Sit swa sterk winters at it dure lutian at ham, for eie laver des mines.
Mikkel, you dwarf, he said. Sounds like a big job, tough work to me. Sounds like hard work to me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a great deal of work. And he says, "Yeah, Leof, yes, Lord. Mitchell je derf it is. It is a great deal of work. For some that it's now frau, because I am not free."
That pottery, is that stone?
It's been a bit hard digging then, has it?
Yes.
Yeah, oh God.
In the late 9th century came the next big change in the village story, the Vikings. Now in the Big Dig, no one expected to find the Vikings, although we did find pottery from their time in Smeaton Westerby, the last bit of whose name is Viking.
Ah, the Buddha of archaeology is seated there in contemplation. Gosh, so what have we got?
Well, most of this stuff is Victorian.
Yeah.
It's all 19th century. We've got this background scatter of late 17th and 18th century mixed in it, but nothing earlier, till I came across that. Now, that's a bit of Stanford ware.
This is BBC Radio Leicester.
But the key clues came from the surnames of some of today's villagers and from their DNA.
If you are an Eilif, you may well be a Viking. Will you text me? Because there's a DNA test going on.
I'm there, that's my father. Then it goes right back to Charles Henry, who's known as Harry. Then George Thomas. George Thomas is my great-grandfather, and his father is John. Then we go back to William, Richard, and John Eilif, who apparently originated from Fleckney.
Terry Eilif's surname appears around Kibworth from the 1300s. It's from a Viking name, Iolfa.
My great-great-grandfather's niece gave it to me before she passed away.
So this is a valuation list. Value of properties, houses...
Wayne Coleman's family have been in Kibworth at least since Tudor times. And his name could be Viking too.
And here, Coleman, John Henry Coleman.
I've gone back to 1692, the connections in the village.
But Wayne's connection with the area could be much further back than he thinks.
I've just looked at these markers known as YSTR markers, and essentially that stands for short tend to repeat. So it'll put you into a broad group of Y chromosome type, and yours seems to fall into a broad group known as R1A. Now that's actually found across all of the north of Europe, so I'd need to do further typing to find out sort of where your Y chromosome type seems to be found. But when we see that type in England, we start to think Norway, we start to think Norse, because it's a type of Y chromosome type that's found at high frequency in Norway. We know that these Y chromosome types arrived in this country through the invasion of the Norse Vikings. You can get a hat now.
Viking. I'm amazed.
And the story of how Wayne's and Terry's ancestors came to Kibworth starts with a sensational archaeological dig made 30 years ago, not far north of Kibworth at Repton in Derbyshire.
So a great view from up here of the landscape of Repton.
This is going to be the site of Trench 8, and we're in the vicarage garden by the invitation, indeed, of the vicar.
The site is where the tree is here, which I planted. And there's still a faint mark in the grass along in front of just where we're crossing now.
Yeah.
There was also a trench all the way down the edge of the churchyard there.
Mm-hmm.
Under here, there was a two-chamber Saxon building, and the eastern chamber had been used as an ossuary.
They found 250 male skeletons, many with wounds, and 50 Anglo-Saxon women camp followers, casualties from the Viking Great Army which had terrorized England.
This is where the Viking Great Army, the Mikkel Herre, as the Anglo-Saxons called it, came in that winter of 873-4. And they built their camp on this spot, dug a huge defensive fortification, anchored at both ends on the river, with the church here in the middle of the defences.
What Martin Biddle and his team had found was the ceremonial burial of a Viking leader, probably the famously cruel king called, believe it or not, Ivar the Boneless. But then, in 877, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the Viking Great Army changed their tactics. They settled down, shared out the land, and began to plough. England was partitioned by treaty. To the south, the English king Alfred the Great. To the north, what became known as the Danelaw. And it's that split that gave the north and the east their distinctive dialects and place names till today. Blaston, that's named after Blath the Blade from the Great Army. Slawston, that's Slugger the Sly. And Ilston on the Hill, that's named after Iolfa, maybe Terry Iliff's ancestor.
There's certainly plenty of evidence that the Anglo-Saxon women preferred the Vikings because they took a bath more often than Anglo-Saxon men. But I also think there's plenty of evidence that some Vikings sent home to bring the wife, as many immigrants do today, in fact. And once they have that control, then other people can come from Scandinavia who may not have been soldiers or military people at all. They could have been families, they could have been immigrants with wives and children coming into an area that was controlled by members of their own. And there's plenty of evidence in the region we're talking about of Vikings moving in onto the less desirable land. These would be these later immigrants, I think.
There's place names near Kibworth which suggest, you know, the thorny place, mm-hmm. the bushy place. Mm-hmm. There's one that I think says a fringe place, and even better, there's one with a thin coating of grass, as if it was a rather miserable place. So that might suggest that the Vikings who moved there are really accepting second-rate land.
Places don't necessarily change their names just because other people move in. In the area around Kibworth, something like 82% of place names are of Old English origin. But if you look at the minor names, the field names, there's lots of evidence that the Scandinavian language was spoken there.
Kibworth found itself the wrong side of the partition line, but it stayed English. The Vikings didn't go in for ethnic cleansing. They settled and mixed, and soon the languages and place names mingled.
Now, if you want to see what it was like on the ground when the Vikings settled here, just come to the back end of Kibworth at Smeaton Westerby. There, you see the posh house there, the red brick, that's Smeaton. English, the Smith's Tun. But if you just go a few yards along the ridge, those houses there through the trees, that's Westerby. Vesterbier, the Viking for the Western Farm. Some Viking warriors settled there after the army disbanded in 877 and made a new life. And all round the landscape there's this wonderful mix of English names and Viking names. This, for example, is the Fleet. That's Viking, Fliot, for a little stream. This area here is what else but a car. Viking speech for a sort of boggy area covered with brushwood. And all around us in the fields there are tofts, that's little farms, and slangs, that's droveways, and even better, over there, there's Crackley. Now the Lee part of that name is Anglo-Saxon and it means a wood, but the crack is Viking, kraka, meaning a raven, raven's wood. So by 1,000 years ago, the basic map of the village is already complete. Viking Westerby, English Smeaton, the two halves of Kibworth. A mix of English and Vikings with the deep DNA of the Celts, the Roman Britons. In the 10th century, Kibworth became part of a kingdom of all England, with a king who mainly spent his time down in London or Windsor. So we started this search knowing nothing about the village before 1066, but thanks to the villagers, we'd found a whole new history. And by the side of the A6, we even found traces of Kibworth's last Anglo-Saxon lord.
Sat at home, opened the bag, emptied it onto the desk, and my chin hit the desk not long after the pottery. It's incredible.
I really felt that we'd wasted everybody's time.
Quite the reverse.
Elfrich, the Thane of Kibworth.
This is in full context, so you're talking a 40-centimetre thick layer.
Oh, that came from all different
This
contexts.
context 5, 6, 7, and 8, and it's all late Saxon.
Isn't that amazing? It really is.
This particular pottery type is called St Neotsware. It's about the earliest late Saxon pottery you get in this part of the world. Now, your test pit was the only test pit in the village to produce St Neotsware.
Really?
Nobody else produced any St Neotsware at all. So that instantly makes it a candidate for early late Saxon settlement. St Neotsware starts about 900. Stamford ware comes in, which is the next late Saxon pottery type, around about 950, 975. We've got one or two bits of Stamford ware. This is the Stamford ware.
Oh gosh, that looks a bit posher, isn't it?
It's considered.
I think I remember when that was dug up, we thought, oh, that is definitely part of a pot, not just a stone.
That sticks us in the second half of the 10th century.
Okay, 950 onwards.
950 onwards. The clincher is these two rim shirts from the St Neotsware pots. Now, I don't know if you can see those, but the shape of those, they're from a particular type of cooking pot, specialist cooking pot. They're known as cylindrical jars, but we call them top hat pots. Imagine a top hat turned upside down. That's exactly what it looks like. Yeah? Straight sides, and then straight out, and more or less straight across the bottom. Some of these pots have actually been used for cooking. If you look at the rim, can you see all the soot still stuck to the rim?
That's what it is.
Yeah, it's where the pot's been sat on the fire.
It was just the soil that had affected
Nope, that's the pot's been sat on the fire. The smoke's come up, and it's sooted all along the rim. That's part of a base of a pot. It's got this thick black and white residue stuck to the inside. Can you see that? That's actually the burnt remains of the last meal that was cooked in the pot.
Food?
That's Anglo-Saxon food, or the carbonised remains of it, certainly. We've got very early Stamford ware, top hat pots. It's got to date to about 950 to 975. It's remarkable.
So
I'll keep my eyes open now when I'm digging.
Well, now the boring document historian speaks, and this is and it changes every time Paul sends an email. You know, I got this email about 3 days ago saying, I think we've hit the jackpot with hole number 2, and that's why we're here. But here's the village, the peasants' tenements there maybe, and this side maybe the Lord's Field. Now right in the middle of that, and that's that pink spot there, is here. Is this. And in fact, when we get on to 1066, I can tell you who may well have lived on this spot, because His name was Alfred in 1066, and we can tell you who Alfred's father was, who was called Meried, which is quite an unusual Anglo-Saxon name, but you pick it up in the 1030s. So you're touching the Anglo-Saxon predecessors in Kibworth, Harcourt.
As this is the only place where we've found St Neotswere, I don't think it's unreasonable to say this is where it all started, after the Vikings were sorted out.
It's mind-boggling, really, when you think about it in context.
So basically we're going to have to dig up your entire garden.
Well, that bit was dug up very substantially at one point.
There's a final chapter in this first part of the story. England was a rich prize, and in October 1066 the Normans won it at the Battle of Hastings. And ever after, the English have wanted to replay the match, hoping there'll be a different result this time.
People still cheer more for the Saxons than they do for the Normans today.
Yeah, and they know we're going to lose, but they still cheer. They still want us to win.
Maybe Kibworth men went down to fight with their lord Alfred, stood in the shield wall and fell there with the flower of the English nation.
The disaster. The end of the world as we know it. Nothing was familiar anymore, and we were. The language was oppressed. Our way of life was oppressed for such a long time.
Just to let you know that the car park will be closing shortly, as indeed the gates will be also.
What does it feel like as to suddenly have this new world coming on top of you?
It's not, it's the end of the world. It's not a new world, it's the finish.
The end of the world?
The end of the world. It's a disaster. It was finished.
Yeah. But it wasn't. A new England did emerge, didn't it? And
because we're resilient.
Ah!
And I think that's just so wonderful.
October the 14th, 1066, was a catastrophe for the English people. A havoc of our dear nation, as a chronicler said. And of course, the English people never forgot it. So how did the villagers respond to this disaster of conquest and war and brutal foreign occupation? How did it shape them and change them? How did they become us?
Use this space for your conclusions about how well your test pitch excavation went.
So ancient Britons and Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, those are our roots.
And if you just find one.
But that's just the beginning. Next in the story of England, the Normans, the open fields, the English pub. How are you?
We feel neglected.
Oh. And the voice of the ordinary English people.
Quite hard work.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Cheers!
A very, very big thanks to you all. It's really been great.